Don't understand you step back. Instead of December. So more people are actually at risk of having the F-250 kick in ways that will. Nothing about it.
Yeah.
And while they were using roads, but I don't understand. An animal doesn't perceive that as a road. It's gonna be paid for them to feel like it's something than the cars.
Oh,
Big scientific difference.
song.
It's,
Dan,
you see this thing going on?
In the pouring rain, very strange. Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. There beneath the blue suburban skies, I sit, and meanwhile back in Penny Lane there is a fireman with an hourglass. In his market is a portrait of the Queen. Likes to keep his fire engine clean. It's a clean machine. Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes.
Yeah, the signing sheets.
Oh, that's for us?
Yeah.
Or is it for everybody?
Yeah, for everybody. So I'll get the meeting started in just a minute. So for anybody that didn't sign in when you came in the room, please go ahead and sign in. Okay, it's 6:34. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I'm glad I decided to move the meeting upstairs because there's a pretty good crowd here, and I think we would have been a little tight in the conference room downstairs. Before we get started, for folks that don't know the Planning Commission, I'll introduce ourselves. My name is Hugh Quinn. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission. Sitting to my left is Carl Henshaw. Sitting to Carl's left is Scott McDonald. Sitting to my right is Kathy Hasbrook. And there's one member that couldn't attend tonight, Jeff Holden. Okay, the first order of business is item number 1 on the agenda is to approve the minutes from March 16th, 2026 meeting. So if I could get a motion for that.
So moved.
Moved by Kathy, seconded by Carl. Does anybody have any updates to the draft minutes from March 16th?
I'm good.
Carl, you good?
I'm all set. Thank you.
You're all set. Okay, so all in favor of approving the minutes as written, say aye.
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 All opposed? The next agenda item is citizens' comments. So for folks in the room that would like to make a comment about something that is not on tonight's agenda, now would need to raise your hand and do that. Okay, notices and comments. The next item on the agenda is really why we're all here, I would say primarily. We're fortunate enough to have Alex Weinhagen. He is a member of the state's Land Use Review Board, and he's agreed graciously to come to this Planning Commission meeting and share some information about Act 181 and Tier 3 so that we could help educate the community and provide a forum to answer questions and provide feedback to the Land Use Review Board. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Great. Thanks so much, Hugh, and thanks for accommodating me and a bunch of others remotely. I would like to come down in person, and hopefully can do that maybe in May or June, because I think maybe it'll be helpful to do this multiple times, but it's certainly convenient. So thanks for making that possible. So again, my name's Alex Weinhagen. I'm one of the 5 members of the Land Use Review Board. Our board is in charge of the state's Act 250 program. And as such, we're intimately involved in the implementation of Act 181, which passed a couple of years ago and was a modernization effort for the Act 250 program specifically, but went a little beyond that as well. I'll just give you a little bit of information, and then I actually have a question for you before I dive in. So the 5 members of the Land Use Review Board were appointed by the governor last year, and we're all new to the program. One of the 5 of us was within the program. She was a district coordinator for many years, and the governor opted to elevate her to sort of help be in charge of the program with the rest of the board members. That's Kirsten Sultan. She lives up in the Kingdom. Our other 4 board members are new. There's Brooke Dingeldine, who lives in Randolph. She's a land use attorney and practiced law for many years, representing applicants in the Act 250 process, neighbors who were opposed to projects. She represented everyone on all sides and has a lot of in-depth knowledge of how the program works and on the legal side. Sarah Hadd is our member from Franklin County. She's in St. Albans. And Sarah was a planner like me, practiced in municipal planning for a lot of years in Colchester, and then was a town administrator in the town of Fairfax for a couple of years before joining this board. Janet Hurley is the chair of our board. She lives in Winhall, so down your way, a little to the west. Janet has a planning background. She worked for the Bennington County Regional Planning Commission, so she has experience at the regional level as well as municipal planning for a variety of municipalities, including Manchester. And then there's me. And so I live in Burlington and was the town planner for the town of Heinsberg for about 22 years before this opportunity came up, and threw my hat in the ring. The governor was good enough to appoint me. My background, I grew up in Vermont, but my background is actually in wildlife. That's what I went to school for. And after a brief stint in Michigan, came back home where there were actual mountains and less people, and less soybeans and cornfields, and more forest. And at that point, I transitioned into community planning. So that's my background. Those are the five of us. Our agency is small. The Act 250 program under the Land Use Review Board is about 35 staff members. And I can explain a little bit about how we're structured, but I just wanted to give you a brief introduction about who we are and who I am before we get started. So, question for you first. I talked to Hugh, and my plan was to give you a little bit of a presentation about Act 250, Act 181, the changes, and then Tier 3 and the road construction jurisdiction provisions specifically. But I can do that in a couple different ways. I've got a general overview. I'm happy to give you that presentation. I can dive right into Tier 3 and the specifics of how we're working through that, a little more in the weeds. Or we can just take questions, and I can just discuss, based on what you want to hear, so that you don't have to listen to me talk first. Hugh, I know we had talked about me giving a presentation, but I just wanted to put that out there for the Planning Commission. Which version would you like to start with?
Yeah, so thanks for asking, Alex. What I think I'll just do, because for me, this is largely more for the community than it is for the Planning Commission. We're fairly well read up on some of the highlights of Act 181 and Tier 3. So what I'd like to do is just through a show of hands to the folks in the room, who would like to get sort of the high level overview of what this is all about before we dive into questions and answers? Or do you want to cut that and just go, right to questions and answers? I think it would be good, personally, for the room to sort of have a little context setting so that we're all sort of on the same page before we get started. So my vote would be, let's have Alex give us a little bit of an overview that will probably help generate thoughts and questions that, we can follow up on. So if folks in the room are okay with that, just kind of raise your hand. Okay, so Alex, we've got a pretty full room, and I think it would be good for you to do, kind of a little bit of context setting. I'll just leave it at that.
Sounds good.
And then we'll go from there.
Excellent. I just wanted to put that out there in case the majority, wanted to cut to the chase. Okay, so let me share my screen here, and I'll walk you through an overview. And I'm just going to enlarge this view so you can see it better. Okay. Hugh, can you confirm that you're seeing that slide?
Yes, we're good, Alex. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So thanks, everybody. Once again, Alex Weinhagen, Land Use Review Board. Got to start with what Act 250 is. Not everybody is up to speed on that. It is Vermont's land use development law. It was enacted in 1970, and it regulates development at the statewide level. Most land use development is actually reviewed at the municipal level. It's only a small segment of development that actually goes through Act 250 review and gets an Act 250 permit. The purpose for Act 250 was honed in a couple of years ago when the modernization law passed, and it is really to balance economic development and housing with Vermont's natural resources and ensuring that our communities can accommodate the development that is happening. It is a process that values citizen participation, and it is a comprehensive review process. It is not a issue-specific state permit, like you might receive from the Agency of Natural Resources for, let's say, a stormwater plan or a septic system, or from VTrans for permission to access a state highway. Those are all issue-specific state permits. This program is much more comprehensive than that. We have 9 district commissions. These are 3-member volunteer panels that serve very much like a municipal development review board. They are the ones that actually receive Act 250 applications and render decisions on them. My 5-member professional board doesn't do that. We help oversee the program and set the rules and try to make sure that all these district commissions are applying those rules consistently. But it is those district commissions that actually decide Act 250 permits. Those 3-member commissions are also appointed by the governor to specific terms, and they're supported by district coordinators. Those are staff members, full-time staff members, who really do they act as shepherds. So they work with applicants to help them get their applications prepared and make sure that they're complete. They work with neighbors to make sure that they are properly noticed about these permits and decisions, and to help them interface with the process. And they also really help our district commissions, the ones making the decisions. So they do the notifications for the meetings. They actually help those district commissions draft documents as well as decision language. And they have a special responsibility in our program to issue what are called jurisdictional opinions, which is simply an answer to the question, do I need an Act 250 permit for that? These are the people who do that, not the district commissions themselves, but the district coordinators will provide a final opinion on whether an Act 250 permit is necessary. It is, like I said, citizen-based, and so Act 250, ever since its inception, has been about inviting neighbors and interested parties into the process to be part of it, to ask questions, or to request a hearing. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So Act 250, we issue 350 to 400 permit decisions each year. Very few of these actually go to a hearing, and I'll give you some numbers on that on the next slide. Very few of the decisions that are issued are appealed. And so I think there's a misconception out there that what you see in the news coverage and the media is what Act 250 typically is. And what you see in the news coverage is that projects are all contentious. There's angry neighbors for every project, and many of them get appealed and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to litigate in order to get a final decision. That's what you read about in the paper. That is not what most Act 250 permits look like. So here's some data from the last few years of what Act 250 decisions actually look like. And I think the important point I want to show you here is look at calendar year 2025 on the right side of the slide. This shows you at the bottom that in 2025, we issued 384 Act 250 permits. There's different types of Act 250 permits. We issued 142 administrative amendments. Those are simple things like you have an existing permit and you need to clarify when an ancillary permit was received or make a minor record change in terms of the permittee. These are generally non-substantive amendments, and those get approved by the district coordinators without any hearing, without any fuss and bother. Often takes about a week to get an administrative amendment. More importantly, minor permits. Minor permits are really the bread and butter of the Act 250 program. They are the vast majority of the permits that are issued each year. A minor permit is a real permit, okay? It's not an administrative amendment, but it's deemed minor because the district commission, after reviewing the application, does not feel that it warrants a public hearing. And rather than scheduling one, they draft an approval and send it to all of the neighbors and other interested parties with a note that says, we think this project is a go. We plan to approve it. Here's the draft approval. Unless you tell us that you have an issue and you want to have a hearing, we're not holding a hearing. We're just approving this project. Fully 226 of the 384 permits issued in last year were done as a minor with no hearing, no angry neighbors, and no appeal. So how many permits did we issue that actually did go to a public hearing where people got to sit around a table and discuss these, the relevant aspects of a project? Out of 384 last year, 16 had a hearing. Those were projects that were started off as minor, but there was a request for a hearing. Those are the 5 you see, minor to major, and then 11 that the commissions elected to treat as a major right out of the gate. So again, I'm showing you this data to try to help you get context for what the Act 250 program actually is versus what you may think it is based on the very contentious cases that the news reports on. Oh, and FYI, in 2025, we denied absolutely 0 permits. Every permit was an approval. So that's Act 250 in a very short nutshell. Act 181. Whole different act. Act 181 was approved by the legislature in 2024, so a couple years ago. It's important to note that it was approved over the governor's veto. He was not in favor of this version of Act 250 modernization, but the legislature overrode that veto. And so it became law. Act 181 does a lot of different things, and I'm going to touch on a few of these. And you see them here on the slide. It includes a variety of interim housing exemptions to make permitting easier and sort of jumpstart housing in areas that are planned for growth, while the sort of permanent exemption areas are being developed and sort of being approved and wrestled with over this year and probably into next. So in the interim, it enacted these exemptions. And it does all these other things that I'll talk about in a moment. So some of the tasks that our board was required to address that have been completed. We submitted a report with recommendations to make it easier for wood products manufacturers to get through the Act 250 program. We're talking about sawmills and other types of wood product manufacturers. A couple of our recommendations from that report are actually in bills in front of the legislature this year and passed crossover and look like they have a good chance of becoming law. We submitted an appeals report last fall. The legislature wanted us to investigate whether there was a way to make the appeal process faster, more efficient, and easier for everyone involved. And so we did make recommendations on that front. Doesn't look like the legislature's moving on those recommendations this year, but we did look at it and provide the report. The regional plan review process, in partnership with what our board is working on, all 11 regional planning commissions around the state are in the process of updating their plans and working with municipalities like Chester to update the future land use mapping, to assess housing targets, and basically to tune up regional plans so that they can come in front of the Land Use Review Board for review and approval. And then finally, as a part of that regional plan review process, Tier 1 areas, which I'll mention in a moment, these areas where Act 250 permitting will be relaxed, we needed to develop guidance so municipalities would know how to apply for that, and that was finished just before the turn of the new year. The regional plan review process is a big deal. So it really makes the regional plans and the future land use maps that come from the municipal plans on up to those regional plans much more significant. And it does that in a couple of ways. But the way that involves my board the most is that it is the vehicle to identify what areas will benefit from exemptions from Act 250. Where are the villages, downtowns, and planned growth areas where Act 250 can be reduced or eliminated entirely? Those areas are defined by you and your regional your regional planning commissions, and then my board reviews those. And once the regional plan is approved or affirmatively confirmed by us, those exemption areas go into effect. As a part of that process, your regional planning commission has developed these maps. For Chester in particular, we already held a public meeting in Windsor. Was it last week or the week before? I forget. It was recent. And we're working on comments on that regional plan so that it can go to a public hearing in your region and then come back to us in a final form later. So I mentioned tier one. So let's go over the tier structure. Basically, Act 181 has us painting Vermont with three different colors. Each color represents a different level of Act 250 jurisdiction. And so the tiers are all about Act 250 jurisdiction. The tier one areas, which are those villages and downtowns and the planned growth areas that are being identified on the regional plan, those areas are divided into tier 1A, where Act 250 would go away entirely, and tier 1B, where housing projects of 50 units or less would be exempt from Act 250. Anything more than that would still require an Act 250 permit. Then there's tier 2. Tier 2 is going to be the bulk of the state. It's sort of the status quo, but with the addition of this new road construction jurisdiction provision that I'll talk about in a moment. And then there's tier 3, which is the side of it that I've been leading the board on, and I can talk to you in more detail about. And that's where we identify critical natural resources that are not already protected by another state permitting system, where Act 250 jurisdiction would be enhanced. So more types of development would go through the review process. So I already explained in the tier 1A and tier 1B areas, we've got full exemption and in tier 1A, partial exemption in tier 1B for housing projects of 50 or fewer units. Generally, we think, based on reviewing half of the regional plans thus far this year, that we're probably looking at about 3% of Vermont's land area in one of these tier 1 designations. I'm going to move right past the rest of the details here and get you to tier 3. So tier 3 is the other side of the coin, and we expect this area to also be about 3% of the state's land area when we get done with it. So we're really talking about a very small slice of Vermont that will have Act 250 exemptions, and another very small slice of Vermont that will have enhanced Act 250 jurisdiction, and probably a full 90 plus % of the state will be in the tier 2 areas. So in tier 3, we've been working on mapping to identify these areas. We've been working on developing rules. We released a first draft in October. We got a lot of good feedback and a lot of questions at that time. And frankly, all of those questions and comments have been rolling in ever since. It's focused currently on 3 particular resource areas: rare, significant natural communities. There's only a very tiny slice of those across the state. These are areas on the ground identified by Vermont Fish and Wildlife. Headwater stream areas, but specifically just the steepest slopes and the most poorly drained soils at elevation, which again represent a small slice of the state, just the most sensitive portions of those upper watersheds. And habitat connectors, which is probably the largest portion of the tier 3 area, and frankly the most contentious at this point. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. We are in the process of refining the draft and the mapping. And so my hope is that by the end of April, early May, we're going to release the next draft, which will show substantially different and reduced tier 3 area and a revised set of rules that addresses some of the concerns people expressed about there not being enough allowance for small scale development in these tier 3 areas without an Act 250 permit. So we're looking to do both, and you should expect to see that towards the end of the month or early May. These tier 3 rules, by statute, go into effect at the end of this year. My board has been very clear with the legislature over the last few weeks that that date should change. We need more time to work on refining these rules, and more importantly, to engage all of you and to use your feedback to revise iteratively. Like, we released a first draft in October, we're releasing another draft at the end of the month. I want to be able to have time to do a third draft and make sure that Vermonters understand what's happening and that information is still getting out. Some of the considerations for tier 3, like I said, expect to be less than 5%. I think it's going to probably be in the 2 to 3% range, at least with the current refinements that I'm working on. It does rely on the road construction jurisdiction provision, which I'll get into in a moment, which is another controversial piece to the Act 181, Act 250 expansion. Without that road construction jurisdiction provision, the tier 3 areas would need to be reworked. And so if that were to go away, which some folks have advocated for, we again would need more time to have that tier 3 discussion and sort of rework that. The tier 3 areas that we've selected are areas that are not already covered by state permitting. So you'll notice we're not including wetlands. We're not including flood hazard areas. We're not including river corridor areas or riparian areas along streams. All of those areas are sensitive, and most of those areas the legislature told us we had to consider for tier 3. But thankfully, they gave us the final say on what to include. And to date, our 25-member working group that's been working since April of last year and the board have tried to make it clear. We do not want tier 3 to be an area of duplicate and unnecessary permitting. So if a resource is already covered by a state permit, we're good. And we don't need Act 250 review there just because development is happening in that area. We are also interested in having the legislature give us a little more latitude in order to make the review tailored within these tier 3 areas. What I didn't explain early on is that Act 250 is all about the review under 10 criteria. And those criteria range from water supply, stormwater runoff, impact on local schools, impact to wildlife habitat, consistency with your town plan, impact to the local road system. So it's a very comprehensive review. And for the first time, we're interested in tailoring those review criteria within these tier 3 areas because these are sensitive natural resource areas. In my mind, it doesn't make sense to worry about whether a development in a sensitive natural resource is going to have an impact on a school, or what the transportation impact to the local roads is. Those kinds of criteria are good for larger projects, but for smaller projects that might trigger in these sensitive areas, we would like the review to be focused on the criteria that have something to do with those natural resources themselves. This would allow us to reduce the number of review criteria, simplify the review process, and hopefully remove a bit of the uncertainty that people have, or at least that they feel when they enter into the Act 250 review. But we need a legislative change for that. Okay, I mentioned road construction jurisdiction. This is the other sticking point for a lot of folks with Act 181. Here's what it does. It basically says that if you're building a road to access new development and that road is more than 800 feet long, you're going to need an Act 250 permit. And that if you're building a driveway, not a road, and that driveway is more than 2,000 feet long, you're going to need an Act 250 permit. The purpose of this was to try to encourage clustered subdivisions that don't fragment the forest landscape. So as you can sort of see in the slide, the picture behind this slide, the legislature was concerned about forest fragmentation over time. Think of it as sort of death by 1,000 cuts, where you have a resource that when you see a small amount of development, doesn't appear to be greatly impacted. But over 55 years of an Act 250 program that didn't regulate or at least encourage good design in those areas, you start to see those forest blocks chopped up over time. So this is a pretty blunt tool, whereas Tier 3 allows us to be very precise and really shape the rule and the mapping based on what makes sense on the ground and the feedback from the folks who actually are familiar with what's happening. The road construction jurisdiction is already set in statute, and it's a broad approach to try to get after development that's happening in interior forest blocks. So my board does not have the power to nullify this or change this. And so we're trying to issue guidance right now. We're taking feedback in the month of April to get people's feedback on how we plan to interpret it. And you might ask, well, what are you interpreting? It's pretty clear. 2,000 feet of driveway or more, you got to have a permit. 800 feet of road, you need a permit. Well, what is a driveway? How does it differ from a road? That wasn't included in the statute. So we're trying to interpret that, and we're trying to do it in a way that gives landowners as much flexibility as possible. In the draft guidance we're looking for feedback on right now, we're proposing that a driveway is anything that serves 3 or fewer homes or parcels, so that if you're accessing just your house, driveway, you can get up to 2,000 feet of that before you trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. You want to do a small subdivision, maybe create a couple lots for your kids, and that subdivision, the access is going to be below 2,000 feet total. We're still going to call it a driveway, and there's still not going to be the need for an Act 250 permit. But you're going to do a subdivision, you want to do 4 or 5 lots, then that access is going to trigger for the 800-foot road jurisdiction level. So that's one piece of it. We're also in that guidance, if you take a look at it, trying to give folks a sense of like how complete does a road need to be by the effective date in order to be considered done, and a few other items. This road construction provision takes effect July 1st of this year. Again, our board is strongly recommending to the legislature that they push this date forward. For one reason is because having this effective date in the middle of the road construction season doesn't work. We don't want people to be halfway through building a road and suddenly the jurisdiction date triggers and they don't know if this project now needs a permit or not. This date should be in the middle of the winter when road construction is not happening. Just as importantly, and just like the Tier 3 date of the end of this year, we really think that we want more time to actually do formal rulemaking, and we think the public deserves more time to both comment on this, to better understand it, and to help us shape that rulemaking as best we can. And frankly, if the legislature has any qualms about this provision, it makes sense to delay the implementation so that Vermonters and the legislature have a year or 2 or more to think about tweaks, changes, and the like. Okay, almost done. One piece that doesn't get talked about much in Act 181 is a new criteria. So I mentioned that Act 250 is premised on reviewing projects under 10 criteria. One of those criteria has to do with wildlife and aesthetics. And under Criterion 8, Act 181 added a new criteria that says we need to come up with rules to help prevent that fragmentation of forest blocks and habitat connectors. And so we're in the process of defining what those are in the context of an Act 250 review, and we're still working on a first draft. This also goes into effect at the end of this year. It's not as far along as the Tier 3 work, and frankly, again, it's a little bit of a broken record here. We need more time, and we've asked the legislature to give that to us. So to recap some of our legislative requests, here are some new dates that we're proposing. These are all contained in a bill that's already been passed by the Senate. So Senate Bill 325 was passed last week by the Senate. It's now being taken up by the House. It pushes the Tier 3 jurisdiction from the end of this year to June of 2028. It pushes the road construction jurisdiction provision from July 1st of this year to January 1st of 2030. And it provides necessary extensions for my board to do the rulemaking ahead of those new dates. It also gives us the authority to refine those review criteria that I mentioned, to tailor the review within the tier 3 areas and also within projects that trigger because of the road and driveway construction piece. And it does a couple other things that are also good. So we're strongly in support of Senate Bill S 325. And we're really hopeful that the legislature will understand and provide the extra time that we're asking for. Here's my contact info. I'm going to be the first to tell you I am a bureaucrat. Sorry, it's true. But I'm also a regular person, and I have an email and a phone number. And I've been telling folks, like, you have a question about your property or your community, just pick up the phone. Call me. You have a concern. You want to lodge a complaint about, what's going on here? Give me a call. Send me an email, especially with regard to the tier 3 rulemaking. I'm collecting all that feedback, making sure it's shared with the rest of the board members, as well as our working group, so that it gets factored in to these iterative drafts that we're trying to improve upon each time around. So with that, I am happy to stop talking and take your questions. I can show some other slides with a bit more detail on tier 3, but might be just as easy to dive into specifics if you'd like to.
Okay, so Alex, thank you very much. I thought that was a great overview to kind of set the context. So what I'd like to do next is I'm going to give the Planning Commission board members a chance to either comment or ask a question. Once the Planning Commission board members have had a chance to speak, then I'll open questions up to folks in the room and on Zoom. So anybody on the board would like to make a comment or ask a question?
Got a few.
Lean up to the mic, Scott.
Alex,
Say-
I'm
say-
Scott McDonald. I'm a planning commission member. Nice to meet you. I have a few questions. As you know, a lot of people are sort of up in arms about not being able to make decisions about their own land when nothing's really being hurt. And you've been talking a lot about tier 3, and we sort of skipped over tier 2 when we know 90% of the people in Vermont are going to be in tier 2. One of the things people are most concerned about is, let's say you want to put a second house on your property or a cottage or something for a family member that needs it. And the driveway road rule thing kicking in means Act 250 and thousands of dollars in permitting and such that might actually make the plans they had not possible for them. And not speaking as a planning commission person, just speaking as a taxpayer, I personally don't really feel comfortable when I see a room full of people making decisions for other people when they entered into their lifestyle in good faith. With people who move here because of the way things are, and then changing it once they're here doesn't sit right with me. Whether people think it's good or bad, it's just, I have an issue with that. So my questions are essentially the 800, 2000. You mentioned when you want to put in a driveway or a road. What about people who were there already? If they wanted to put in an extra building or a barn or a cottage, they already have a driveway that's over 800, but they're not building a new driveway.
Great question. So yes, the way it's constructed in statute is that after the effective date, which right now is July 1st of this year, but hopefully will be moved. If you are doing new construction, new road or driveway construction after that date, and that new construction is more than the requisite number, so 2,000 feet if you're, doing a driveway, then you trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. If you have an existing driveway and you're putting a little spur off of it for a second house, or maybe you don't need a spur at all. It's suitable for what you're building. You're not going to trigger the need for an Act 250 permit because it's tied to construction after a specific date and new construction of more than those numbers, 2,000 feet for driveway, 800 feet for road.
So let's just say that we already have 1,000 feet of driveway and road on a property, and we're just putting in a little cottage for our kid or our mother or something, and it's only going to be a 300 or 400 foot driveway. In other words, that means they're not going to be kicking in 250, correct?
Correct.
Then my next question is, by skipping over a lot of the details about tier 2, if the math corrects, that means 90% of the people in here potentially are falling into tier 2. A lot of people, we hear the word rural because, like, I live in a rural area as it's designated now. I just sort of assumed it would be tier 3. And when I went to the map on the website, when you click the overlays and you turn everything off and just turn on tier 3, you go, wow, there's hardly anything there. So we have all these people in tier 2, and some of them don't even know they're in tier 2. They just assume they were going to be in tier 3 because of the use of the word rural. So I'm more concerned about tier 2 because that's most people in Vermont. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this road rule is going to be kicking in on July 1st for tier 2, and tier 2 has not been moved to a later date. Would that be correct?
Nothing's been moved to a later date at this point, but yes, the road and driveway construction provision applies in both tier 2 and tier 3 areas. It does not apply in tier 1 areas. So after July 1st, unless the legislation changes, any new road or driveway construction beyond those trigger numbers, the distances, would trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. And so you're absolutely right. And I'm sorry if I glossed over it too much. 90+% of the state is going to have Act 250 jurisdiction as we currently know it, plus the road and driveway construction trigger.
So if we have 4,000 feet of driveways and roads on our property right now, as long as we don't exceed the 800 feet on anything new, we're safe from 250. That's something I did not know. So thank you for explaining. I think a lot of people are worried that if they have an 800-foot driveway now and they want to do something, that they automatically are kicking in Act 250. And what I'm hearing from you is that's not the case.
Correct. Our board's been talking about this for some time, and we've been very clear in our discussions with ourselves that we have no interest in interpreting the statute to trap people who have existing driveways and roads. That's not what the intent of the statute was. That's why it specifically says it must be new construction, and anything existing already doesn't count against you in any way.
And I know a lot of people, including me, were confused about it. And the only other thing I wanted to ask.
The clock's ticking.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to be quick here.
I'm kidding.
That's all I can think of right now. I just, farms and things. That farms are already exempt is another understanding I have. But I haven't seen any classification on what Vermont considers farms. And I would just suggest for peace of mind with the public that maybe whoever's doing this comes up with something that maybe even includes homesteading and such, because, you've got Vermont has many different kinds of farming and agricultural work. And I would love to see people be protected against changes like that.
Yeah, it's a good point, Scott. One of the misunderstandings, my bad for not doing a better job, getting the word out, is that maple sugaring, for example, is somehow gonna have a problem. And we're in maple sugaring season, or just the tail end of it now, so it's sort of apropos. And the fact is that farming has a broad definition in Vermont, and it has lots of special status when it comes to both municipal level permitting and Act 250 permitting. And I just want to go on record tonight to say maple sugaring has that special status as farming, and no maple sugaring operation will require an Act 250 permit under the current Act 250 rules, nor under this Tier 3 road construction, any of this business. Those exemptions will remain, and they apply to logging as well, forestry, as well as other types of agricultural use. So those exemptions are not going away. And I think what's important to note, though, is that when farmers or sugar makers or folks who do forest management want to carve off a small portion of their land for their kid or their grandkid, and they're creating some housing, those areas of their property could be subject to this depending on whether they're in a Tier 3 sensitive area, how much development is proposed, or how much road or driveway is proposed. So it's not this law doesn't touch people who do those ag and forest operations, but where it could is related to housing that they might produce. And that goes for farm and forest access ways as well. I should be clear about that. The road and driveway construction provision does not apply to new farming roads or new logging roads, but it does apply when you convert an existing farm or forest access into an access for housing. And so if you're doing a conversion of that sort and you're doing new construction that meets the 2,000 foot or the 800 foot trigger, then you could require a permit.
Thank you. My biggest thing was that I was just concerned that most of the people I spoke with thought that it meant that if your driveway is already 800 feet, and that's not the case. So you were very helpful. Thank you.
Very good. Carl, anything?
No, I'm good.
Kathy, anything?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so at this time, what I'd like to do is entertain questions or comments from the folks in the room and on Zoom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the room first. If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. Evan will bring you a mic. Please state your name and your comment or question. And we'll try to make sure that we get through everybody's first question before you get to have a second question. So anybody in the room have a question or a comment about anything they've heard tonight or anything they're curious about as it relates to Act 181?
Steve Mancuso, good evening. I have a question, Alex. You mentioned critical natural resources. Can you be more specific on that, please?
Yes, good question. It's a term that was used in the Act 181 legislation without a definition. So what I think of as a critical natural resource is the types that we already regulate. These are natural resources that allow our natural ecology to function and help contribute to our own public health and welfare. Wetlands are a good example of that. Wetlands help absorb water from storms and help filter that water and cleanse it. They provide habitat for wildlife. They have a number of functions. I think of wetlands as a critical natural resource. There are many others. For the purposes of Tier 3, which is to try to map those resources, again, our rubric was we're only gonna map resources that aren't already protected. So wetlands, for example, we rejected that because they're already protected. We're only going to map resources that we have decent mapping for statewide. And we're not going to include resources that cover broad swaths of the state. So if it's covered, if somebody says we want interior forests to be a Tier 3 area, well, those cover 60 to 70% of the state. That doesn't work for Act 250 jurisdiction. We've got to hone in on what piece of those forests is the most sensitive. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of a flavor of how we think about critical natural resources. We looked at 17 of them for Tier 3. And we landed with three. And those are the ones I mentioned, significant natural communities of the rarest types. Some headwater stream areas, at least the steepest slopes, most sensitive portions of them, and these habitat connectors.
Thank you, Alex. Anybody else?
Yes, hello. My name is Emily Payton, and I wanted to bring our attention back to our core and highest law of the land, which is our Constitution. And I want to question how the legislature can redelegate authority. But first of all, I think we need to look at the fact that the Constitution hasn't been repealed. It is the people's, it's the people's authority from which the legislature acts. Now, when we look at the very first article of our Constitution, we have an unalienable, natural, and inherent right to private property. So that means that when it's inherent, it comes from God. When it's natural, it's here before government. When it's unalienable, the government cannot amend it. They cannot change it. And in fact, there are many of us who are looking at the fact that property tax altogether is likely unconstitutional. So it isn't the concern. Most Vermonters, I believe, really want a sustainable Vermont. But what is of concern here with your claiming jurisdiction over lands is a creeping of authoritarianism, and also an omission, a complete omission of the one thing that would really help us with sustainability, which is expanding our small organic farms, because the small organic farms are the ones that are going to rebuild the soil, have the soil sequester the carbon. And yet in this whole legislative process, what we are seeing is our small farms are continuing to drop. And small, we only have 15% left. So it sort of begs the question, when you've omitted that primary response to sustainability, where we could become the breadbasket with organic farming. Roger Albee was all about doing all our dairy organic. What the deeper agenda, and also, do you really have authority? Because just because the legislature may have passed a statute, that statute isn't necessarily agreeing with our Constitution. So there's going to be a lot of scrutiny and possibly a constitutional challenge. And there is a movement starting to propose a new constitutional amendment, which is in short, right to food and farms. And the primary responsibility of the legislature to promote more organic farming for the common benefit. And that's my comment.
Thank you, Emily.
My name is Jack Williams, and I would actually like to make a comment more than a question. Act 181 was vetoed by Governor Scott, and it was overridden by the legislature. And following that, you had people that were concerned about this went up to Montpelier and voiced their concern about it. Every one of you right now, it's super, super important that these delays that they've come up with, that we ensure that we have time to really look at this before all this is approved. Because the gentleman on the end down there brought up a absolute excellent point. Right now, we're getting mind locked on tier 3. Tier 3 basically just covers things like ski resorts, but tier 2 is the one that covers all of us. This is the one where, you know, your farms and your houses, this is really important to look at and not get kind of behind the curve on the driveways and stuff like this. And then the lady that just spoke there brought up some excellent points. So the bottom line of what I'm saying, I may have come across a little bit disjointed, but the bottom line is right now we have some time. One of these, I think the gentleman brought out till 2030 to look on it, some delays, but it's important that tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, every one of them have delays. So all of us in here and every town in Vermont can really look at this because, like I said, Governor Scott vetoed 181. And my thoughts is it should be vetoed. Now, another thing that's coming up is Act 59. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. And this is where they talk about the 30 by 30 and the 50 by 50. In other words, 30% of Vermont's land by 2030 will be basically no one can do anything with it. And then by 2050, the 50 by 50 rule comes in, where 50% of your Vermont land, no one can do anything with it. And what's kind of happening is people are being guided into living in towns. And to me, I get the sense that all the rural areas, the natural resources are going to be put off for anybody to be able to use. So again, without rambling on and on and on, we need time to look at this whole Act 181 and then also the Act 59 that's coming down the road. Because personally, the legislature didn't sit down in a couple of years and come up with this whole plan. You know, this is a worldwide organization that's involved in part of coming up with this. And so that's why you have to look at it. Now, we have 14 conservation districts in the state of Vermont. I think I read that they've been in about 85 years. They've been, concerned about the conservation of Vermont and doing an excellent job. So why are we coming up with something like this, the 181, the 59, to do work that really the 14 conservation districts should be doing? So hopefully I made sense in what I said, but basically the bottom line is we need time to really sit down. Every one of us in here, we can't turn this over to a little group of the legislature to put into law and then lock us out. It's like this lady brought out, the people are the ones that run the state and the legislature answers to us. That's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Like I said, that gentleman down there that brought up the tier 2, it's important to look at all these tiers.
Hello, my name is Vicky Master, and I'm curious how this tier 3, first of all, from what I understand, 181 is not a good act and it needs to be repealed, that there's nothing good about it and it's not for the people and it wasn't voted by the people, it was voted by the legislator. And this is private property, whether it's 1% or 8%, for somebody to come in and say that they're going to use your property for something that they want is completely unconstitutional and unacceptable. And Vermonters do not want that. We came here because we love the land and we bought the land so that we could care for it. And we don't know what really you want to do with it. I wish you would be clear with us. And I'm sure you have the best of intentions and you're a wonderful man, Alex, from what I hear. But at the end of the day, like Emily said, and this nice gentleman, this is unconstitutional and the Vermonters should not agree to this, and it should not be, it needs to be appealed. It's not a good bill. Thank you. or act rather.
Randy Miles. Vermont is the second least populated state. Wyoming is number one, and we're not far from their numbers. So I'm really not sure why we are putting so much restriction on the people. The people moved here, lived here, thrive here for the space. They care about their land and their surroundings very, very much. And I think have been doing a very good job over the centuries in protecting that. So I'm really not so sure why we have so many restrictions now being placed upon us. There's farmers who needlessly have to say, if tough times come, they have to sell portions of their land just to get by. That's tough. And to put any kind of restriction on them when they're forced to do something they really don't want to do to survive is just ridiculous. I don't know why there's so many restrictions. I think it's way too much. This doesn't satisfy the rural Vermonters, only the people around the city and the suburbs and stuff. So I would definitely be against any of this. Pushing it off for further discussion would be good, but I don't agree with a lot of this at all. It's too much restriction on the people.
Hey, Randy.
My name's Lucas Saunders. I recently purchased land in Chester that's been designated as a Tier 3 area. It has an existing wastewater permit, and I was wondering if I will be affected by Act 181, and will I be required to get a Act 250 permit?
That's a great question, Lucas, and probably best for you and I to talk directly so that I can understand what your plan is and give you some more specifics about whether this is something you need to worry about. I will tell you that others have raised that very same question of like, hey, what if I'm in the middle of doing something? I already have some of my state permits, like a wastewater permit. But I'm sitting on it because I'm not ready to build yet. Now I want to build in a Tier 3 area. Does that mean I'll still need an Act 250 permit? I've already, put some time and money into this. We need to address that in the rules, and we haven't yet. So I appreciate that feedback, and you should hold my feet to the fire as we go forward to make sure that there's at least an answer. But what I can tell you is that the feedback we got on the first draft back in October was Tier 3 areas are way overblown. You should shrink them. So we're working on that. The next version will be substantially smaller. And two, you're not providing, you being us, the board and its draft, we're not providing enough exemptions within those Tier 3 areas to allow small scale development to happen. And like folks would tell me, sure, you want to capture a 4-lot subdivision and it's in a sensitive area, it probably should go through some good design and have, a review of it. But if I'm just building a single home, why should I need to go through that? It's a small amount of impact. We took that feedback seriously, and we're working this next draft of the rules to try to allow for that in these, even in these sensitive areas. So that's a long-winded way of saying, with your specific situation, Lucas, it really does depend on what you're planning, and I'm happy to talk to you about that. Just give me a call, send me an email. We can look at maps together. We can have a conversation.
I'd appreciate that. And furthermore, I'm kind of thinking about future plans. I mean, right now, maybe I can squeeze a house out of myself, but I don't know. Maybe I want a garage or a chicken coop, and 20, 30, 40 years from now, when I'm still here, is that going to come back up later on down the road, or is it just for single family homes or?
Yeah, I can guarantee you that our intent is to not require an Act 250 permit in a Tier 3 area if you're adding on to your existing home, if you're building a chicken coop, if you're putting in a garage, all those sorts of typical things that a Vermonter does around their home. We are looking to structure both the mapping and the rules to exempt or avoid those things triggering the need for an Act 250 permit. But again, the details matter and, your plans and your property has specific features, let's talk.
Okay, thank you.
Others in the room?
Yes, my name's Russell Manier, and I have a question on the whole headwaters, the wildlife corridors, and exactly who decides what those are, what little amount of people decide that. And this thing is already law. So who's to say come next year, well, we've decided that there's some new headwaters and this and that, and we're going to maybe introduce some different animals into the state that haven't been here, which is going to greatly expand this habitat and make it unusable for anything. So I just think this is a backdoor land grab and totally for it.
Hey,
Thank
Alex.
you, Russell. I can respond if you want me to. The people in charge of figuring out those areas is my board. But the way we go about doing that is through a public process where we try to listen to everybody and find balance. And so I'm not saying we're perfect. We're not. But we don't have any malintent. And our goal is to hear what people are saying and try to implement the law while providing the most flexibility to property owners as possible. At least that's my mission. And I would say that within the tier 3 areas, those specific resources that I mentioned, I'm happy to talk to you specifically about how they were identified and frankly what some of the downsides are in trying to map them. It's not easy, and they may not all survive the cut. And so we're trying to be transparent about like what we think we might do with a draft. And then we want people to tell us like, you got it wrong. Like this, you missed an important resource, or the one you're mapping, you're not mapping accurately. And it's through that specific feedback that we can jettison ones that don't work, resource areas, add ones that we haven't thought of, and refine the ones that are actually going to stick. Your question about what happens down the road is a good one. And our philosophy so far is to say we want to go through a robust public process where not everybody's going to agree, but we want everybody to be heard and try to find the balance. And then once we adopt the rule and the map, we want to dip it in amber and say, these are the places, this is the rule. And yes, it could change in the future. We could reopen the rulemaking process, but there's got to be a good reason for it. And in order for that to happen, we got to go through this very public process all over again. We don't want to play gotcha. We don't want, Vermont Fish and Wildlife or some other conservation group to add a new resource, next month or next year and have it automatically show up on the tier 3 maps. We want those maps to be fixed. And then we want there to be a public process if they are to be updated in the future, if there is better data and more information to come to bear. The other thing I want to tell you is that we know that mapping at the statewide level is not going to be 100% accurate at the parcel level. And so we built into the rule a correction mechanism where a landowner can come forward and say, hey, Land Use Review Board, you screwed this up. You said this was an important habitat connector. It's been a parking lot for the last 10 years. Your mapping is off. And so we've incorporated a provision that allows landowners to very easily provide that information and for our district coordinator to say, good enough. There's no jurisdiction here. No Act 250 permit necessary, even though you're building in what was mapped as a tier 3 area. I'm trying really hard to avoid those errors, but we recognize that they can happen. And so we wanted to build in a mechanism within the rule to allow that to be fixed. We are not building into the rule the opposite mechanism where a neighbor who maybe is aggrieved can come in and say, hey, I think you didn't map enough tier 3 on my neighbor's property. You should map some more over there. I noticed that area is sensitive. The rules basically say that can't happen. The only way to add things to this mapping is to reopen the rulemaking and go through this very public process.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, this gentleman.
Philip Atwood. I would stand up, but my back kills me. A little historical overview. I was a land surveyor. And before Act 250, we had Act 249, which was the septic part of this whole shebang. Because this Vermont was booming in 1969. I just started surveying company and we were working 80 hours a week because we couldn't keep up with it. And over in the areas like Dover was the reason Act 249 came into being, because sewage was running down the gutters. And it was definitely needed and it was a good law. And then in 1970, Act 250 came in with the 9-lot rule, where you could, if you built less than 10 lots, you didn't need an Act 250 permit. And so you're pretty much went by what the town zoning was, if there was any. And some towns still don't have zoning. But anyway, the Act 250 came in and it got stiffer and stiffer as the years went on. They kept changing the rules back, and you had this 800-foot rule I think all the way through. I couldn't swear to it, but I think it predicated bad land use in a lot of situations. And because to get away from tripping at 250 trigger, the developers and the designers would make a 799-foot road and have a cul-de-sac and then have all these triangular lots coming down with the minimum town frontage to make the lots. And so I think it made for really poor land use. And we're still talking about it. And I think it was a poor way to handle it for if you were trying to make good land use. So anyway, as a surveyor and having a lot of people come in to talk to me about their subdivision, I don't know how many people I talked out of going through Act 250. Because if they wanted to subdivide, not develop, if they could divide their land with 5 lots on existing road frontage, instead of building over 800 feet of road and tripping Act 250's trigger, they ended up with more money in the end because they didn't have to go through all the public hearings, hire attorneys, and so forth. So anyway, that's my comment. Just a little historical overview. And here you go.
Thank you, Phil.
One more thing, just a quick.
Hold on. Anybody else? I want to make sure I get to some Zoom folks too. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take. No, then I would like you to hold off until I can make sure that, okay, Roy, you will be the last in the room for now. Then we're going to go to Zoom and see if there's any questions, and then we'll come back to the room.
Roy Spalding. My question is, it seems very odd to implement all of this to appease 7% of the state of Vermont. So if 93% of us are negatively impacted or could be negatively impacted, what would be the end game of being such a push to do this to 93% of the state?
Right. I'm not sure if that was sort of a rhetorical question, but I'll just tell you what I understand the intent of the Act 181 law was. To be clear, I didn't write it. I wasn't serving in the Act 250 program when it was written or when it was passed. But my understanding is that the legislators were not out to get anyone. Their intent was to try to make sure that when development happened in sensitive areas, that there was some level of design, good design, and some level of review of it. And I think their concern was particularly with regard to our interior forest areas and the introduction of long roads and driveways into those areas, to do residential development, other development too, but largely residential development. And as Phil indicated, a fair amount of that happened in a way that never required any Act 250 review because folks would do it below the existing triggers. And so I think their thought was, we're over the 50 years of Act 250, we've seen a lot of smaller development and subdivisions that have not been through review, that ended up starting to fragment those forest areas. And so they wanted to change it so that when there was that level of interior forest development, that projects could still happen, but that they went through a review process that would encourage them to be more clustered and not have as much of an impact. I think that was a big part of the intent. But the other part of the intent was to try to remove Act 250 permitting from areas that the state had invested in and wanted to see grow. So the villages and the downtowns, the areas where municipalities had invested in water and sewer and sidewalks and all of those things, that's the flip side. They wanted to say, let's make sure that these areas have less restrictions and can actually grow. So it was a bit of both on both ends, but I don't think the intent was to disadvantage people. I think intelligent people can disagree about whether the law actually does disadvantage people. And I've heard a lot of folks say it absolutely does. And I get that, but I don't think that was their intent.
To bring it back not bring it back, but to really push this much harder, there has to be something more to basically affect 93%, the 7% that are in the big towns or cities or whatever you want. They're always going to have the means to do what they need to. The rural community are the ones that are really going to be hurt by this. It just seems that there's got to be a bigger prize up there for somebody to be pushing this hard. You're not, it's not you, but that was just, the answer being is it just doesn't seem in the last 4 or 5 years that to be pushing it this hard, all of a sudden, there's got to be a bigger reason to put 93% of the state at a disadvantage.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say to that, Roy, is that although I wasn't part of the program, I was active in the Vermont Planners Association while what became Act 181 was being discussed. About a decade ago, the legislature created a commission on the future of Act 250 when it was, getting ready to turn 50 years old. And that commission did a lot of work and had a bunch of public outreach and such to figure out how should Act 250 as a development review program be changed to meet the new needs. And so it wasn't just in the last 4 or 5 years. This didn't happen all of a sudden. This was almost 10 years of the legislature trying, failing, trying, getting close, failing, trying. COVID happened, not being able to pass it. And eventually when it did pass in 2024, folks kind of referred to it as the grand bargain. I don't really like that term, but it strikes a chord for some, where there was, okay, we're gonna reduce permitting in places where we've invested in, and we're going to make sure that in sensitive areas that maybe didn't get reviewed in the past, that there is some level of review. So just know that there is a history of it, just like Phil indicated, the longer history of when it started. There's also a history of how we got to this modernization law, Act 181. And like I said, I think we can all debate whether it does, the things that it was intended to do. But yeah, just know this didn't just happen in the last few years. It's been building for the last decade.
Great, thank you, Alex. So for folks that are on Zoom, if you have a question, please raise your Zoom hand. Okay, well, I see a real hand. So Mara, go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us your name and ask your question. Maybe he's just waving at his camera.
He's a.
Yeah, maybe.
If he's like me, he's just trying to figure out how to unmute himself, because when you do this on a phone, it's a real pain in the rear end.
All right, thank you. I'm a farmer, not a computer guy.
Well,
hello, thank you very much. My name's Steve Crozier. Thank you, Alex, for being here. I just wanted to kind of touch on something that Lucas had mentioned. 8 years ago, I purchased a property, residential home, and I've been slowly converting it into a commercial farm. I am recognized under the USDA Ag Office with a farm tract number. However, I am not recognized in the town as a farm. I am a resident, just a residential property. I was wondering how this may affect me coming into market season. I'm looking to add a third greenhouse in the property, also expand my hog processing, which I would put outbuildings, a couple more outbuildings for moving the pastures around and paddocks. I was just wondering how this Act 181 may affect this property in a sense that I may be hindered from doing such if I'm not under an actual ag classification.
It's a great question, Steve. And regardless of what the municipality classifies your property as for zoning purposes or future land use or whatever, there are clear thresholds for qualifying as an agricultural use and qualifying for the farming exemptions that would benefit you with regard to this Act 250 business. So again, easier to have that conversation, one-on-one, or maybe even refer you to one of our district coordinators for your area so they can look into it and give you a better answer. But if you meet those thresholds as a farm, as far as the state's concerned, regardless of what the municipality says, then this will not affect your agricultural operations because you will be exempt.
Okay, Geraldine Donahue.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation, Alex. I'm a realtor, and so I meet with many clients and have met with clients and buyers, sellers over 25 years here in Vermont. And I'm wondering, my sense of most of the people that I deal with, they move to Vermont to get away from clustered subdivisions. Why would the state want to change the complexion of Vermont to be more like suburbia?
That is a great question. Working in Heinsberg for 22 years, I heard that question an awful lot. Heinsberg is a community of about 5,000, just under. It's on the border of Chittenden and Addison County, so it has the development pressure that comes with that part of the state, but it has mostly a rural character over most of the town, and it also has a pretty vibrant little village area. And folks in town would ask me the same question, like, hey, the state's been promoting this smart growth vision for the last 30 some odd years, and Heinsberg was a pilot community for some of those initial efforts. And but this is Vermont. Why people don't want to live on top of each other? What doesn't everybody want to live out in the country? And there are many answers to that. I'm a planner, so I could opine for a long time. I'll just tell you that it has been the state's vision for more than 3 decades to encourage this concept of smart growth, where people don't necessarily live on top of each other, but that more housing is created in areas that are close to services so that people can walk to school, so that people have potentially access to services like a hardware store or groceries, and so that those areas can be developed more efficiently at less cost because they have access to water and sewer, which as a realtor, makes a big difference as to, how developable a property is and how much money it will cost to build on it. So that's been the state's vision. I think it's really important to recognize that we are in Vermont, and even though there is a smart growth vision, it always assumes that there will still be housing and development in the more rural parts of any given town, not just in the village, not just in the downtown. But there is an intent to try to promote more development in those villages and downtowns for some of the reasons I mentioned. So I don't think that the legislator's vision is that everyone should move to the villages and the downtown areas and the cities. That's not what's going on here. But that there should be balance, and that the reasons that people move to Vermont and choose to move back, like I did when I was away for 2 years and couldn't handle it in Michigan, need to be back here, that the reasons people want to stay here and live here don't go away in the process of us building more housing over time. So not a great answer, I acknowledge, but that's part of the rationale.
Okay, so part two of my question is, then I get it, the smart growth and wanting to make services available to people and having balance. That sounds very reasonable. But then to put restrictions on the more rural areas and the wildlife corridors, and I don't think I have a full grasp of what the connectivity blocks are and how I've even gone on the map, but I find it very complex, and I don't see a legend, and I see all the colors pop up, but I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at. So I wondered if you could address the connectivity blocks in the rural areas and what the intent of that is.
Yes, happy to do that, and appreciate the question because, it's not intuitive, and I apologize. Like we're doing what we can on the mapping front, but we can do better. So when you turn on the map, and I could share my screen and show it to you if that would help.
Sure.
Okay. Hugh, would that be all right if I
Absolutely.
did a quick map demo?
Put a couple of maps up. Why not?
All right, we're gonna try to do it live, which is always dangerous. So bear with me. Okay, so this is the Tier 3 map viewer that when you go to our website and you click on Act 181 and go to the Tier 3 page, there's information about our process and status and all that fun stuff. But then there's also a link to this map viewer. So the first thing that happens before you get to this map, there's a little splash screen that comes up that actually explains how we did some of this and says, please read this, and then click OK. Every time you start the map viewer, that screen will come up. So don't feel like you missed it the first time because you wanted to just get to the map. You can start it over and it'll pop up. But this is where you land, and this is what's displayed initially. And you're right. You're right that the legends don't automatically pop up over here. So let me show you how it works. The map is here in the middle. This box on the right is our map layers. And the ones that have checkboxes are the ones that are turned on. You want to turn one off, uncheck the box. You want to turn it on, check the box. You want to see what this layer looks like, the legend? Just to the right of the layer name, there's this little icon that says legend. Again, not intuitive, but once you know it's there, click on it. And sorry, we'll do that for the Tier 3 areas. It'll show you what each of the Tier 3 areas looks like.
Okay.
So let's zoom in. Let's go to Chester. So as we zoom in, different aerial photos of different resolutions will pop up. And you can see here as the tier 3 areas are displayed, I mentioned there are 3 types. There's headwater stream areas, which there aren't very many of in Chester. There are these mint green areas that you see right here and right here, if you can see my cursor. There are also these habitat connector areas that kind of look like fried eggs with a little yellow yolk in the middle and the surrounding sort of green area. Those are along roads, certain road segments. And then there are significant natural communities of the most rare type, which are in purple. I don't think there are any in Chester, so you're not seeing them pop up. The other thing that automatically pops up are these tier 3 exclusion areas. These are in the red crosshatch. And this is an approximation of what the tier 1 areas might look like. It's not an exact map because there is going to be a better one through your regional plan mapping process, which is already in play. But we're trying to show you an example of like, hey, if there's a sensitive resource and it's sort of in your growth area, we're not going to have it be tier 3. We're going to exclude any of that within that area because we don't want to have tier 1 and tier 3 be in the same place. So that's what you see initially. And then where the questions tend to pop up is when you scroll down on the map layers and you see these reference areas. It says reference areas not tier 3. So that's pretty clear, right? But then you're like, well, why are they there? And what do they look like? Okay, well, you got to turn them on first. Check that box. And there's 3 of them. So you got to turn on each of them to see them. So the first box is elevations of 2,500 or more. They're in red. Sorry. You see, I'll turn it back on here. You see them pop up over here. There aren't any in Chester. These are the highest elevation areas that are generally already subject to Act 250 jurisdiction for most development. We wanted to show them on the map because we're excluding tier 3 from any of these areas. You can see over in Andover when I turn it off and on, the tier 3 area kind of straddles those mountaintops. And that's because there already is Act 250 jurisdiction there. Tier 3 doesn't need to go there. So that's why it's there for reference. Then we show the protected land database. These are areas that have some form of conservation easement or state or federal ownership. Some of them are owned by the Nature Conservancy, so they have some level of protection on them already. And you can see they're in green, and you can see there are some in Chester. And we wanted to show those as reference because one of the comments people made was, hey, you're identifying tier 3 areas, but how do those relate to the areas that we've already done a really good job of conserving? So we wanted to show them so you could see sort of how they relate to each other. And then the one that's the most confusing for folks is this VCD connectivity block layer. And again, when the initial splash screen opens, when you start this map viewer, it explains what that is. VCD stands for Vermont Conservation Design, and it's a way that the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department has mapped the Vermont landscape at the statewide level in a couple of different sort of dimensions. And what we're showing on screen in dark orange are the highest priority habitat connectors that create a network of habitat for plants and animals to move across Vermont. So I'm going to turn off the tier 3 layers for just a moment and the exclusion layer, just so we can focus in on this reference layer that a lot of people are confused about. So if I zoom out from Chester and show you the state of Vermont, you can see where these dark orange areas are. You also see a lighter yellow color. Those are what Fish and Wildlife calls priority habitat connector areas. And for the purposes of, priority connectivity blocks, for the purposes of coming up with these tier 3 habitat connectors, we wanted to focus on just the dark orange, just this network of highest priority connectivity areas. And so we wanted to show you where they are, because when I zoom back into Chester, you're going to wonder, why did we identify habitat connectors? I'm going to just display the 2,000-foot version of those habitat connectors. Why did we identify these green areas along certain roads? We did because these are the road segments that divide these dark orange, larger habitat blocks. And what we want to do is make sure that over time, as development happens along these roads, that it doesn't isolate these larger blocks of habitat that are connected and broken up by these roads. And so each of these dark orange areas is a defined block, and they are divided typically by roads. And so, if we zoom into this particular area in Chester, off of Route 11, you can see that there's a habitat block here to the north, and there's a habitat block here to the south. If I turn off the tier 3 areas, you'll notice that the places where there's existing development are not really considered part of that block. But these areas that still have intact forests that come right down to the road, those are the areas that we were trying to key in on and say, okay, if you want to develop in these areas, you're welcome to do it, but let's just make sure that you go through and have a proper design so that there's a place for the development and there's still some intact forest left for critters and plants to be able to move from this large block to this large block over time. And that's where these sort of circular buffers were indicated. So that's why we're showing the VCD connectivity blocks. It's not because that we're trying to put tier 3 areas there. It's because we're trying to use those to define where the connectivity area should be across roads.
So just to clarify, in the orange areas, if you were to do a new, let's say a single family house, a new project for a single family residence, would you have to go through Act 250 if you're in the orange area?
It's a great question. It depends. If you are building a new driveway to that single house and that new driveway is more than 2,000 feet, the answer is yes. If for some reason you have some existing roadway and driveway in there and the amount of new driveway you need to build is 1,200 feet, the answer is no. So it does depend.
Okay.
But
it's still the road rule, not the
correct. And I think it's really important for people to
Yeah.
understand that the reason that I said that these two things work together is because this tier 3 area is set at a 2,000-foot buffer away from the road, such that when you do exit the tier 3 area and get into these interior forests, you may need a permit because of the road and driveway construction provision. But it just depends on how much new road and driveway you're creating. And it really helps to look at specific parcels and understand where the proposed development area is going to be. Some parcels are big enough where they can definitely exceed that 2,000 feet of driveway to get to a good development spot. So they're going to need a permit. And others, they're not even 2,000 feet deep and they're just never going to trigger the need for a permit within their property. So it depends on the parcel.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. I'm going to do a time check. It's 8:12. We're going to take, how many more? I got one more Zoom question from Eric. Then I'm going to take one last round in the room and then we're going to call it. So Eric, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you very much. Alex, appreciate you trying to help shed some light on this. I'm sure as you've gathered here that there's not one person that is excited about this in any way. And I really hope that that's the message that you bring back. It would, excuse me for being frank, but it would be a great disservice to the people that are concerned about this to not bring that back to the full extent to which this is looking to impact us. I mean, I look at the roads, I was studying that map and I'm zooming in and out on my phone as I'm watching this, and animals don't care where things are. They'll cross the road, they'll hang out in your yard. If you spend any time in a town around here, they got deer living in the backyard, they don't care. So I worry that this is more of a long-term land grab grab with the initial implication of raising some taxes, and it's going to only price out the people that can actually afford to do these things. And maybe that's the strange underlying intention behind this. But I think the challenge here is that it feels like a loss of privacy, feels like a loss of freedom, and it feels like it's moving in all the directions the people that here are trying to listen to this and understand the things that they don't want and the reasons why they came here to get away from things like that. So I hope that's the type of messaging you bring back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, and be assured I will bring that message back to the board. I report back after these kinds of meetings, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We had 4 listening sessions across the state in late October when we released this first draft, and we heard a lot of that. We heard a little bit more of like, I don't even really understand what this is. Can you just explain it to me first so I can have an opinion? But once we explained it, yeah, a lot of concern, not a lot of support. I hear you, and I will bring that message back to the rest of the board. And please know, we're charged with implementing the law. We don't get to rewrite the law, but in doing that, we're trying to factor in these concerns and give folks as much flexibility and as much room within the law as we can possibly deliver. And we have the ability to do that within these tier 3 areas really well, because the legislature gave my board the authority to map it, write the rules, put in the exemptions, define what triggers. Like, we get to sculpt that, and you can help us do that. We have much less ability to do that with the road and driveway construction provision. That's baked into statute, and we can provide some guidance, like I said, about like, hey, we're gonna give people more houses off of what we think is a driveway, so you get the larger 2,000-foot trigger rather than the 800-foot road trigger. That's about as much as we can do. And so I tell people, if these things are if you don't like what's happening, please talk to your legislator. They've been hearing the message, and particularly with regard to the road and driveway construction provision, I forget who made the comment. I think it was Jack. Like, the bill that's in front of the legislature right now gives everyone the time to have more of this conversation. And if you want the law to change, it gives you time to get it changed before it goes into effect. And the way the legislature works, we're past what's called crossover. The legislative season is more than half over. And so this bill that's in front of them that did pass the Senate is a real opportunity to push these effective dates out and give my board time to do a better job, involve more people, and frankly, give you and the legislators time to think about whether bigger changes need to happen, rather than just extending dates, but maybe doing some more fundamental changes to the law.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to close the meeting by giving Tom Charlton, do you want to grab the mic and have a couple of words?
Hi, Alex, Rep. Tom Charlton, you and I get plenty of opportunities to talk, but I just wanted to clarify your comments about the wildlife corridor. It sounded like you were saying that the road rule applied only where the wildlife corridors are, or is that not true?
If I said that, I apologize. The road and driveway construction provision applies in all tier 2 and tier 3 areas. So what I think is probably going to be 93 to 97% of the state.
So the wildlife corridor would trigger an Act 250 permit right to the road.
Yes and no. It depends what's proposed, because the board gets to sculpt the tier 3 areas. We're going to try really hard to make sure that what a typical Vermonter might want to build in a tier 3 area will not trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. It's got to be something more. So within those habitat connectors near the road, it will very much depend on what's proposed, not just the fact that you're building in it. But beyond those, more than 2,000 feet away from the road, if you're building a new driveway, you're going to need an Act 250 permit because of the road and driveway construction provision. There isn't that same flexibility there.
Okay. So looking at the online map that you were showing, turning on and off the different overlays, is the road rule overlay still there? I couldn't find it.
Good question. It is not. So my board members who are working on the draft guidance we have for the road and driveway construction provision schooled me a little bit in the last few weeks saying, Alex, that's not properly mapped anymore. We're proposing that you could have up to 3 new houses off of a driveway. And that map showed areas that were more than 800 feet away from an existing road, with the implication that if you were building in those areas more than 800 feet, you would need an Act 250 permit. And they're like, that's not what we're writing. We're trying to clarify people can do 3 new houses on a driveway 1,500 feet, 1,800 feet back off the road. So we took that layer off the map viewer and pointed people to the guidance document that we're taking public comment on this month.
That and there is an email for feedback on that road rule. Is that?
And it's on sorry, I don't have it in my head. And if I spoke it, it'd be hard for you to write down anyways. Go to our website, just do an internet search on Act 250 Vermont. You'll get to our homepage, and right on the homepage on the right side in a little yellow box, there's, looking for public comment. And we have separate pages for the road construction jurisdiction provision, tier 3, all of these components of Act 181 all have separate pages, so you can sort of read an overview, dive into a specific area, and that email to provide comments is on the road construction page.
I think I found it in your recent email, Act 250. That's act250.comments@vermont.gov.
Exactly.
That is the one. All right. And thank you. I have other questions, but I'll send them to you.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It was very informative. It was a big help. I think we had a good dialogue. We got some common understanding of what is and isn't, in the plan. Yeah. Hey, Alex, before we close this agenda item out, would you mind just popping your slide up with your contact info? Just because there could be some folks that want to follow up. And if you wouldn't mind doing that, I would appreciate it.
There you go.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. Can you make it a little bigger?
Coming right up.
There we go. Excellent.
Yeah, and Hugh, I just want to let you and the rest of the planning commission, anybody who's left, know, like I said, tier 3, working on it, refining it, hoping to have a new draft of the mapping and the rules towards the end of the month. Really want to spend May and June talking to folks more, doing more public engagement, talking to landowners, planning commissions. I'm happy to come back in May or June, show you how the draft has evolved and talk more about it. I get the fact that most folks tonight just, really wanted to ask questions and just lodge their opposition to, most of these expanded Act 250 jurisdictional provisions, and I appreciate that. But I'm still happy to come back, hear more of that, or talk about the specifics of tier 3 and how it's evolving. In May or June, we'll also have a sense of where the legislature landed with regard to any changes to this. So we can talk about that too.
Perfect. I appreciate that, Alex. So we will definitely take you up on that. We'll probably touch base in a month or two. And I'm not going to take any more questions or comments on this topic tonight. The night is getting long, so I'm going to close this agenda topic and move on to the next item, which is a motion to adjourn. So can I get a motion to adjourn? Okay, Scott made the motion. Carl seconded the motion. All in favor of adjourning this planning commission meeting?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Very good. Thanks, everybody.